Now, my next guest and the final guest for today is a man who knows the answer to this question and many, many more. He's our CEO, founder of the group. We're going to go to the COVID classroom, and the head of the class is someone who knows a bucket load about leadership in good times, but probably more importantly recently in not so great times like a pandemic. Most of you know who Graham Skroo Turner is. You've probably seen him on Sky News, ABC, Channel 7, in fact, any bit of free media we can get him on right now. He will be on there. You would have heard his opinions over the last 19, 20 months. And today he's going to join me in Brisbane to talk COVID, leadership, and indeed why it's time to fly. Now, remember, if you've got any questions at all to ask Skroo, please feed them through. I have an iPad right here. I'll see them pop up, and we can ask Skroo some questions towards the end. So, Skroo, welcome.
Thank you, Captain Tom.
I knew you'd bust me out early. Now, it wouldn't be right for you and I to meet without a glass of red.
Well, lucky it is after 6 p.m.
It is after 6 p.m. Now, in Sydney, where a lot of our customers are, it's well past 12 now, so we're good to go. But cheers.
Cheers.
Here's to what's been a tough 20 months. So let me take you back to that painful time. 19th of March last year. The company was going reasonably well. We were growing as we had been for 40 years. There was an announcement about international borders closing, and it was rumoured for a bit, then it happened. You're the founder, the CEO of the group. We had 22,000 employees at the time. Talk me through how you felt that day, and what did you say to your wife?
I actually remember because the time pretty well, because I got back from London on the 12th. I think it was a few days later, and the international borders shut, and I think the transatlantic shut with Trump and that. So, it was pretty devastating. I mean, I think, and I know you were around at the time, I know Mel got back from New Zealand about the same time, and I think we decided we'd have to move quite quickly. We knew it was going to be tough for at least a few months. But if someone said that we would be sitting here now, 20 months later, or I haven't counted exactly the months, but still in Australia, still fairly largely shut down, I would have said you are absolutely stark raving mad. But there was that sense, and I think my team in the task force realised we had to do something pretty quickly. Our costs at the time were $230 million a month, and before many days were out, our income was virtually zero. So, we've always generally been pretty well cashed up and liquid as a company, but it was pretty obvious we'd have to cut our costs very quickly and essentially hibernate. We thought for maybe a few months until we were remembering. You might be too young to remember, but SARS 1.
Yep.
I think it was around
2003.
The turn of, yep. You were born.
I was born. I was very much born. Yes.
And it lasted a month or two.
Yep.
We just assumed that somehow the powers that be would sort it out, and that's what I did anyway. But it hasn't happened like that.
No. So when do you reckon it hit you that it was much bigger and it was going to last a lot longer than it did?
Look, we had to raise money, I think, in April, May of that year, and we had to start looking ahead, and it really hit home then that we're in this for a longer run, probably not as long as we think it is, but, and we had to reduce our costs sort of dramatically. Probably even more so than we first thought we had to do. I think in credit to our leadership team, and as I said, Mel was one of the ones that was quite instrumental in putting the urgency about it initially, but I think all the leadership team, we're in 23 countries, the MDs of those countries and the different regions all pull together to really cut our costs back to essentially to a third. And a lot of the problem that was, of course, is that also a lot of our costs were in people.
Yep.
So we lost probably 2/3 of our people either stood down or made redundant over those first couple of months, and that's pretty tough.
Yeah, it was harrowing, and as one of those leaders who went through that with my people, it was one of the most horrific, if not the most horrific thing I've ever had to do in a work sense. But I guess, as you said, a lot of our costs tied up in people, a lot of our investments over time have been in people. In knowing you for the years I have, the one thing that you always said, if gun to head, the one word you'd use to describe what you wanted Flight Centre to be was fun. How do you keep that sense of culture in a business that is completely decimated by this?
Yeah, well, it wasn't much fun, if you remember, for the first few months. But I think we got back to an element of that after a few months. We had to pay for our own fun.
Disaster.
I don't know who paid for this line, but that was part of it.
Yep.
And but it's still, I think as a team, I'm quite proud of the fact that I think everyone worked together, everyone supported each other. One of our major things, if you remember, was to protect our assets, our key assets. And although we had to reduce dramatically our team numbers, our shop numbers, the teams in corporate, as well as the people and a whole range of other assets, that we identified what our really key assets that we could not afford to lose, and it's our people. And our experienced people, our people who deal all the time with customers, our people who deal with suppliers all the time, absolutely key. And we really desperately try to make sure we kept our really important assets. And I think we did, by and large. There's still quite a few people we would have preferred to have kept, but we just couldn't do that.
Yeah, and we are famous for our people and our person-to-person relationships we have as an organisation, without question. If you think back now, you think about keeping those assets and making the decisions you did, has it changed you as a leader in any way, shape or form? Are there things you do differently now?
Look, I mean, I've been in business since 1973. You wouldn't believe that, would you?
Now, that was the year I was born. There you go, you nailed that. Yeah.
And we've been through a lot of things, cash flow crises in the early 80s, first Gulf War, 90, the 9/11, the Great Recession, or the 2008, and this, all of those pale in a total insignificance compared with what this is in a travel business, as you imagine. But I suppose having that experience, having a very experienced team, like a lot of the senior leadership have been around for a long time. I mean, you've been around, what, 15 or 20 years?
Since the dawn of time, yeah.
So, and I think nearly everyone of the senior leadership team, and including myself, have been through a lot in the past. And so one of the things we don't do is panic. We accept that we've got a lot of stuff to do. We've got a lot of sacrifices to make. But we'll get through it. Yep. And I think that's stood us well. If we had had an inexperienced team, it would have been so much harder.
Yes, I agree. So, as you said, this thing's gone on way too long. And obviously today is all about a time to fly and getting back to where we were. We've had a few false starts. We thought we were coming out of this, over a year ago. Then it stopped again. We've had lockdowns. The people in Melbourne particularly have been massively affected. How do you? I think we as a business, as someone who works in your business, we've changed it. We've had to go back and have things approved by finance people, and we've been constrained by costs. And one of the things that's great about Flight Centre is this ownership and this feeling that you run your own business and you can make your own decisions. It's one of the secrets to its success over the last 40 years. How do you get your business that's had such ingrained philosophies back to a growth mindset when you've been keeping costs down for 20 months? Yeah,
well, I have a secret admiration for accountants, as you know. The fact that you do have an accounting degree, I believe, yes.
25 years ago doesn't count.
But, they obviously played a role in helping preserve our cash. And some of that's been tough. And people had to take significant sacrifices in salaries for a long time, still are.
Yep.
But I think that's the price we pay for being in an industry like this that's so severely affected by this COVID. It's really, you could argue it's affected more by government restrictions than by COVID now, and that's certainly one of the issues we've got. Mm-hmm. So it's just as important to convince our governments to have a practical way out of here as it is to make sure we can cope with the COVID infections and make sure we get vaccinated and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the core, if you think about going now, like one of the things I think that we as an organisation have done really successfully over the years is almost marketing or selling our way out of downturns in the past. You mentioned SARS, Gulf Wars, et cetera, et cetera. How do you get this massive hockey stick acceleration coming out of this?
Look, this is going to be harder because obviously our We can't afford to spend a lot on marketing at the moment, but we've made sure that through this we've kept, we're talking about our key assets, and some of them were our technology systems, our technology products, particularly in corporate, but also in our leisure businesses. And that's really important because we have kept spending on this and developing these, and I think we'll be coming out of this in very good stead. Obviously, in things like marketing spend, particularly in leisure, we're not at the stage where in most of our markets we can really ramp that up yet.
Yep.
But as soon as we see a really clear picture, whether that's in New South Wales now or in the UK and USA, Canada, with the transatlantic opening up on November the 8th, we will start spending on our marketing and making sure that as we come back, we'll come back quite strongly. So it's still a little bit up in the air exactly when that happens, but that is happening right now. And I think that I'm pretty confident we're going to come out of this stronger than we went in. Unfortunately, or I don't know about fortunately, this is not going to happen over the next 6 months. We're predicting over the next 6 to 9 months we'll get back to a profit globally, but it's going to be possibly 2.5 to 3 years before we get back to pre-COVID levels of sales and TTV. So, it's a long road, and I think bringing people along with us on that road is really important. We've not made any apologies for that. This is not an overnight thing. It's going to affect our industry for some time. So that is one of the challenges. But certainly, I think myself and I know you and other members of our leadership team are committed to being here for the next 3 years to really make sure that happens.
So you talked about challenges and you talked about restrictions. I know you and a few of your colleagues in not just the travel industry but in other industries have said about, and it's been in the media recently, said about a constitutional challenge. By the way, have you seen The Castle? Daryl Kerrigan? All the way to the High Court? No? Don't know.
Apparently I haven't. Right now.
No. So he talks about the vibe and various things. Anyway, we can talk about that another day. The constitutional challenge, which I know you've launched recently. What's your objective there? What are you trying to achieve?
Look, we think some of the states are quite recalcitrant in terms of their easing restrictions, and we're really pleased to see that Queensland is definitely easing restrictions on December 17, although we think our mathematician, Smithy, our mathematician, has worked it out, and I wouldn't argue with him. 6th of December, we should be getting to that 80% mark. But we're still concerned about WA in particular, that it might be some time, and we and the other companies that are challenging this, we're a country with a constitution. That constitution, Section 92, does guarantee freedom of movement. They call it intercourse, but it's freedom of movement of people and trade, and it's there for a purpose. And unless it's reasonable to restrict that freedom, we think that it's becoming unreasonable, particularly at 70 to 80% vaccinated people. So we are going to challenge that, and we just hope that WA will see the light and at least give us a plan, and then we'll see whether that plan's reasonable. And the process is in play now, because these do take some time. It can take several months to do this. So,
and how's this different to, say, Clive Palmer's challenge last year? Is that different?
Well, it's totally different. If you read the outcome of that case, there was no vaccination. So it was considered by the High Court reasonable that they shut the borders to prevent the infection getting in. But everything's changed now, particularly when 70, 80% of people are vaccinated. We believe, and generally our advice is that it would be generally probably not considered reasonable at this stage.
Okay. So let's talk about vaccinations as well. Slight change of tack. You were fortunate enough to get on 2 overseas trips over the last 18 months. Obviously, you run a global business and going to be to other parts of our business world. I think both times went to the UK. I think you went once in December, did some hotel quarantine on return, and then once recently in July, same again, hotel quarantine. Can you sort of talk a little bit about your experiences of those two things and how it differed in a vaccinated world versus a non?
Yeah, well, the first one was basically I spent most of December in working from London. That was December 2020. And obviously there were no vaccines then and a lot of infection there. But, you know, luckily COVID only affects old people. Maybe that's a problem. But the second time was July, August this year.
Yep.
And there's a reasonable level of vaccination. When I got to London in about the 11th of July, I think about 60% of the UK was vaccinated, which is, you know, Australia's well beyond that. And they basically opened up, if you remember, Freedom Day on the, I think it was the 19th of July. But everything was back to normal, except there was still quite a bit of infection. Hospital rates weren't too bad, and it's the same now. In fact, infection rates have spiked again. But, you know, you lived in UK for quite a while. I mean, they take it in their stride. You know, I would have said it's the least of their problems, you know, a bit of COVID. But there was a pandemic and that sort of thing. But just in travelling, it surprised me how relatively easy it was. You had a lot of paperwork, but it sort of worked. And I know people are worried and concerned about, okay, the digital passport and the travel pass, the vaccination passport and that. But it looks like this is all reasonably well sorted. If you have to have a piece of paper or you have to have an app on your smartphone that links with your passports, it looks like it's pretty much sorted. Most of the major countries will be quite good at doing that, and we found, unfortunately, having to do quarantine is not a great thing, particularly 2 weeks. But the actual travel aspects works quite well. And so as things open up, like New South Wales from the 1st of November, this will be one thing that will go quite smoothly. And that's our people, as you know, in corporate in particular, but also in our leisure people, that we really keep them quite right up to date with what people need, whether they're travelling to US, Canada, or Europe particular.
So let's have an unashamed plug for the travel agent, because actually I think navigating this new world is pretty tricky, right? How much back and forth did you have with your favoured travel agent around these trips, and what was most valuable?
Oh, look, I must admit, I couldn't have done it without it was really a travel advisor, Selena from FCM. And because she's done quite a lot of this, she knows the scene back to front. If you're doing a trip by yourself, for the next few months, maybe for the next year, it's going to be really important to have a travel advisor who knows what they're doing, who has access to good information and has done it many times before. And so, that's the downside is obviously for us as a travel advisory body, it takes a lot more time. But it's something that I think we can really do for our clients and make sure that they get the best information, the latest up-to-date information, because you've got to have that while you're travelling.
Agreed. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the future. Here we are in October 2021. It looks like there's some international travel opening up in Sydney next month. I think the Prime Minister's come out and said it's for Australians initially, but then that will change. You talked to a lot of your colleagues in the industry and outside the industry. We had Alan Joyce and Jane Herdlicker on earlier, talked a little bit about what they thought was going to happen. What are your views of, if we're sitting here, let's fast forward to June 2022, so 8 months from now, what do you reckon it looks like for us here?
I think Jane and Alan both had some really good insights on this. I'm going to ring up Alan and find how he knows that WA is going to open in February, but he probably knows more than I do about this. Look, I think we'll be starting to get back to a reasonable level of normality after Christmas. Maybe not if you're in WA, but I think even Queensland will bring forward their overseas travellers being allowed in without quarantine. I'd argue, what's the difference if you're an Australian or a family of an Australian, a returning Australian from overseas? What's the difference in that than someone returning from Melbourne? And I think this will become pretty obvious. If you're doubly vaccinated, you've tested negative within 3 days, I think these restrictions will come at around that 80% mark. And as I said, I think it'll be before December 17th, but maybe I'm a bit of an optimist, but I'm pretty sure the Queensland government will revise that once they see that it's pretty silly, discriminating between different sorts of Australians, let alone, I'm not sure if you're a different nationality, why that makes you different, but that may be an element of xenophobia, but I won't go into that.
That's a conversation for another day.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So last question from me, and then we've got plenty of questions here on the iPad as well. Obviously, the last 18 months has been the toughest, probably in your time here. Do you see that Flight Centre, you mentioned Flight Centre Travel Group getting back to a growth place now, and we probably see pre-pandemic levels by a couple of years from now? The value of the travel agent, the value of booking with a person, do you think that now in a post-pandemic world that's going to have more or less value than it had pre?
Look, I mean, I think we mentioned it before. In the next 3 to 6, maybe 12 months, to travel, you'll definitely need an expert travel advisor.
Yes.
I mean, but obviously we're putting a lot of effort into automation and self-service, both in, for simple transactions anyway, both in leisure and in corporate. So that'll become more and more important. I presume you've heard of the internet?
It crossed my path, yes.
Yeah, well, that's going to become, as things come back to normal, particularly domestically, particularly in simple point-to-point transactions, that will eventually, over the next, maybe in 6 to 12 months' time, become more important for us and for our customers. But I think, in terms of travelling safely, making sure we know where people are, making sure that we have that duty of care for our people, that's the sort of thing that we obviously do well now, and we've got to continue to do that. And there'll be other aspects of this over the next 12 months to 3 years.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you, Skroo. We're going to take some questions from the audience, so thank you for everyone who's been writing in. I've got a question here from Cass. She says, I'm curious about how Flight Centre will look to reignite and regrow their talent pool, assuming a lot of the team have moved on in the customer-facing space, but the demand will keep growing. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're obviously in a different position in some of the overseas countries, whether it's South Africa, where we're back into profit and back to, I think, 50% of pre-COVID, compared to, say, 30% in Australia. So we have had quite a bit of experience of what we need to do, and we are bringing a lot of our previous people back. We've kept in touch with them through an alumni program. Yep. So we're really trying to be, obviously a lot of these people have other jobs, but I think a lot of our people do love travel. They'll want to come back into travel, and that's certainly the indication we get at the moment. So, so our first priority is to bring our older people back. I mean, old...
Our
former people back, and that's what's happening in the UK and in North America in particular at the moment. So, and we're starting that in Australia, as you're aware.
Yes, great. Okay, fantastic. All right, another question from Simon. When do you think flights available will again equal demand? For I see demand going up, but the number of flights are not keeping pace. Will this then flow into an increase in prices?
Well, I think both Alan and Jane said the same thing, that prices, as the capacity comes back, which, this week we saw, I think, January domestically, there'll be 75 or 80% at least of capacity. So I think the prices after Christmas will come back to some level of normality. Mm-hmm. And if you look at... domestically in the States, they're back to over pre-COVID levels. So the airlines need a bit of time to bring capacity back, but providing they've got certainty, providing they know, for example, in Australia, what borders are open, what international traffic is open, and it's going to stay open, they'll be able to bring back capacity reasonably quickly. Can't do it immediately, but... they've been preparing for this, airlines like Qantas and Virgin domestically, but also people like Qatar and United have been doing this, have been looking at this. They're still flying into Australia, so they'll be able to ramp up that capacity pretty quickly. Yeah,
I agree. Okay. I've got a bit of a personal interest in this question. I've had a few questions around this, actually. As you know, I'm a West Australian, by birth. Well, not by birth. I'm an Argentine by birth, but I grew up in WA. My family's in WA. I've got lots of family in London. Which one will I see first?
Look, I'm afraid it's London, I'm afraid. Probably.
Yeah.
Things can change very quickly, as we've seen, but it looks like certainly if you live in New South Wales, we know that's going to be the first. But Queensland's not quite as obvious.
Yeah, I'd agree. Now I know the answer to this question, but it's been asked. Where did your nickname Skroo come from? Firstly, can we clarify it's spelled Skroo, not any other way? Anyone who's thinking anything outside of that? Where does your nickname come from?
Look, it used to be spelled Screw actually, but someone thought it wasn't a good look about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
No, I went to boarding school and there was a Turner screwdriver. So there was a housemaster there called Turner as well when I arrived,
right?
And his nickname was Screwdriver. So I was the small version of him, and I got Skroo.
You got Skroo, righto.
Stuck.
Very good. All right, Skroo. Oh, we had one more question just about New Zealand. Obviously, the Prime Minister over there has been very hot on COVID. We run a pretty sizable leisure business, particularly, and corporate business in New Zealand. Any insights on when that's going to open up? And that international travel is crucial for them, obviously.
Yeah, look, I'm a bit optimistic here. I know they've been very recalcitrant of everyone, but I think they'll open up before Christmas.
Yep.
Particularly to certain areas. As you know, they've got the virus is pretty much endemic there, so there's no reason why they can't open up to fully vaccinated people. So that fully vaccinated is going to be the key.
Yeah.
Perhaps a negative test 72 hours before you arrive as well.
Brilliant. Okay. Now, for those of you who don't know Skroo, every Tuesday and Thursday he plays touch footy. Nothing takes precedent over touch footy, not even our biggest customer event of the year. In fact, in 2 years, well, that's not true because he's come to this, but he will be scurrying out of here to go play touch any second. It's like a religion in Flight Centre. So, Skroo, thank you so much for coming. It's been great. We've got lots of great feedback on the social media here about your insights.
Thanks, Tom.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. And here's to 2022
This is
being...
not good for touch.
No. Oh, that's not what you told me the other day. Here's to 2022 being significantly better than 2021 and a massive return to travel. Thanks for your insights.
Thank you, Tom.